AT&T and Aira present another installment in their series featuring individuals who have influenced the blindness community through their passions and through their actions. Today we introduce Belo Cipriani.
About 10 years ago, I lost my sight in San Francisco. My cause of blindness is retinal detachment due to an assault. In addition to the trauma of becoming blind, I was also dealing with the trauma of being betrayed by a group of people who I thought were my friends.
Belo Cipriani, the victim of a tragedy, but let's not dwell on that loss.
I was angry for a while, and with the help of my friends and the support of my family, I was able to see that there's more to life than just being able to do things in one way, and that I could negotiate life without vision.
Belo talks about his advocacy for disability rights.
It wasn't until I became blind that I realized that diversity also includes disability. A lot of these companies who have amazing diversity statements don't have accessible website.
And his sexuality.
As a teenager, the next phase was, I came out as being gay. This was the early 90s before Ellen and Elton. People would then ask me, why can't you be normal? When I became blind, then people would just say, oh, life must be hard for you because you're not normal.
He speaks of his writing.
I have two book projects that I'm working on now. One is an anthology, and the second one is a sequel to Blind, which is also a collection of essays.
And his attitude about blindness.
I think that blindness opens up so many opportunities, especially for connecting with people. I think that you don't need sight to have vision.
AT&T and Aira invite you to enjoy a conversation with Belo Cipriani.
I'm very happy to be blind in 2017.
Brought to you by Blind Abilities.
Welcome to Blind Abilities. I'm Jeff Thompson.
And I'm Pete Lane. This morning our guest is Belo Cipriani. Belo is so many things. Belo is an author. Belo is an eloquent advocate for disability rights. And by the way, Belo is blind. Good morning, Belo. How are you this morning?
Good morning. Doing well. Thank you for having me.
Our pleasure. Belo, for our listeners who are not familiar with your story, why don't you tell us a little bit about Belo and how we got to this point now?
Sure. I grew up in California, and about 10 years ago, I lost my sight in San Francisco. My cause of blindness is retinal detachment, and the cause of the detachment was due to an assault. I got kicked in the head by a group of men, and that's what set off my blindness. And I talk about this a lot in my first book, my memoir. That's where my life changed. I started learning about disability and disability rights and disability technology and immersed myself in the community, began writing, and one thing led to the other. And I'm doing a lot more than writing these days. I'm doing other side projects. But the catalyst was really, going from someone who was sighted and able-bodied to someone who had a disability, and seeing the contrast in how people interacted with me left me with a lot of questions. And I used my inquiry to really begin this journey.
Yes, and the assault to which you refer was quite tragic and devastating. Obviously, it brought on your blindness. I'm reading your book, Blind, a Memoir.
Beaten and blinded by friends he once trusted, author Belo Cipriani learns to live and conquer his new world. Follow Belo as he chronicles the 2 years following his life-changing assault in Blind, a Memoir, available at blindamemoir.com.
It is available on Bard. That's my vehicle for reading it now. But it was a very poignant story about how you had developed a tight group of friends, seeming friends, and then at one point those friends actually turned on you. Can you talk a little bit about the actual attack?
Yes, the group of men that assaulted me were actually my childhood friends.
His dark brown eyes looked straight into mine as he pushed me back. Tapping into my martial arts training, I allowed my body to absorb the push and took 3 steps back.
These were a group of men that I befriended in high school, and were really the first group of men who I was completely open about my sexuality with. I'm gay, and these were the first group of other gay men my age at that time that I met. So it was a very special type of bond.
I began to shift my body and turn around, and felt the first impact in the back of my head. A cyclone of punches then followed, and I was knocked to the ground. I felt like a sailor in a vast black sea, falling under the spell of the familiar song, the hypnotic sound growing louder and louder as the choir of sirens called for me.
To have them a decade later blind me was very tough. So in addition to the trauma of becoming blind, I was also dealing with the trauma of being betrayed by a group of people who I thought were my friends.
Yeah, the story in the book was spellbinding, and I have to again reiterate it's available on Bard and I'm sure elsewhere, but it's a very good read and absolutely well written, so I compliment you on that. My heart sank when you described that event. But nevertheless, you then went on and actually went through several surgeries. The final one, as I understand it, was the time at which the physician, the surgeon, said to you, "I'm sorry, Bello, you're facing blindness without any chance of recovery."
Can you see my fingers? I struggled to swallow for a few seconds before answering, "No, it's all black. It's darker than last time." I heard him move some tools around and ask, "Can you see the light?" I let out a faint, "No." I then felt his breath on my face as he said, "The main goal of this procedure was to save your eye and maintain a healthy anatomy. Your retina is attached, and you may be a candidate for future procedures. As for now, I suggest you contact the Lighthouse for the Blind. I'm really sorry, Bello." I felt a sharp pain in my throat that burned as it made its way down my chest and into my stomach. Dr. Hopkins excused himself. He tapped my shoulder and I heard him close the door behind him. My mom and sister both hugged me. I became aware of the rage making its way through every vein in my body and stuttered my attackers' names, beginning to produce the most toxic tears in my life.
Talk about that emotional hit and how long it took you to overcome that.
Like you mentioned, I had multiple surgeries, and each time I had the surgery, I kept losing more and more vision. And so after the first surgery, I gained a lot of vision back. Actually, the vision that I gained back was, I think, about 20/40, 20/50. And so that was just in one eye. And that gave me hope. And I had that for about a month. And then overnight, my retinas detached and I had surgery to attach them again and then got some vision back. It was spotty. Then they detached again. So I went through the whole gamut of the low vision world where I could see text and color, then that faded, things turned black and white. Then they got really foggy until I ended up in complete darkness, which is what I am right now. I'm completely blind.
So what was it like, and how long did it take you to accept your fate, and how did you get to where you are with the acceptance of blindness?
Obviously when you go through the mourning period, when you lose something or someone, you go through the whole gamut of emotions. And I think my first reaction was anger. I was angry. I didn't have a chance to be in denial. I think I was, maybe in denial when I was low vision, telling myself I'm not blind. I could see a little, I could see, colors. But when I became completely blind, there was no room for denial. So I went straight to anger, and I was angry for a while. I was there a couple months, and with the help of my friends and the support of my family, I was able to see that there's more to life than just, being able to do things in one way, and that I could negotiate life without vision was very crucial for me. And I think also a catalyst or a big contributor to my being able to get out of this depression and anger was just being surrounded by a lot of really accomplished blind people. I would meet them at the Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco. I would meet them just riding the public bus and the train, and just seeing that there was remarkable blind people, engineers, lawyers, doing all kinds of things gave me hope, and I could then see myself having a life.
The pivotal point from what I gathered in reading the book prior to the assault, at one point, and I'm not sure this was your intention, but you made a point about, the whole gang of your friends were getting ready to go out, and you informed the guys that you'd not be available to do that next week because you had to study for your SATs. Do you think that was the issue that may have festered with them, that you were trying to make yourself a better life and going on to college and studying, and that may have somehow insulted them or somehow demeaned them, and that might have led them to the attack, do you think?
I spent a year going through surgeries, and so I spent a good year to a year and a half in bed recovering from these surgeries. And I think 90% of that time was spent reflecting on what happened, with these guys who were my friends. Did I do something wrong? And my opinion on that changed, as I progressed and was able to distance myself from what happened. I could reflect more clearly. But I think that, you outgrow your friends. And I think that that's what I did. Some people call it bettering myself because I was trying to pursue education. Regardless, I was outgrowing them. I could have picked up a different journey for me. I could have gone, do something else. But I felt that I outgrew them and I began to distance myself from them. And eventually, like I mentioned in my book, they just became, people I would sometimes, recognize at a festival or an event, but then didn't really have anything to talk about. I do want to point out, though, that, I will never know what they actually felt like when they were assaulting me, but I don't think it was planned. This was so random. I was out in the city in a place I normally don't go to, and I just happened to run into them. So I don't think that, they woke up that morning and said, we're going to get Belo. I feel that maybe they saw me and they didn't like what I had become. We live in a society filled with instant gratification, so they just acted on emotions without thinking of the repercussions and what could, happen to me.
Wow. Belo, when you decided to take charge of your life again in the darkness, as you called it, you mentioned San Francisco Lighthouse for the Blind and Visually Impaired. Is that where you attended training?
That's where I began my training. That's where I took my first couple steps as a blind person. And then after the Lighthouse, I moved into a living facility called the Orientational Center for the Blind because I wanted to accelerate my training. And that was a living facility where I had a dorm. It was basically what I referred to as blind college. I had a dorm and I had classes every day, and the whole goal was to get through my rehabilitation much quicker.
So what was it like when you had to accept all the alternative techniques, all the devices, and this whole world? Did it open up your mind to opportunities and something that I can do this attitude?
I think that when I first started learning, JAWS and learning to use a cane, I was overwhelmed and frustrated, and everything seemed so hard. But, just as hard or as big as life felt when I was, a kid, I think that, as I kept pushing myself forward, things just became easier. And I think what was very inspirational for me was to see other blind people who were, for example, in the same program I was at the Orientational Center for the Blind in Albany, California, who were further along than I was, and see what they could do kept me going. But definitely it was, it was frustrating, and, I stuck with it. So it slowly became easier.
What was your college experience like?
I actually went back to grad school. It was obviously not what I had as a sighted person.
It was relaxing to shed my dress shirt and ties for sweatpants and sandals. Madge also seemed to enjoy the large fields and the other animals that made up the 50-acre forest campus. With the exception of faculty and staff, most of the residents would not talk to me or join me for a meal at the school's cafeteria. Eating alone soon became a habit, and for the first time in my life, I accepted the fact I would be a loner at this school. When I was sighted, my loud voice and laughter filled every inch of this hilled and sloped campus. I had friends coming out of my ears and an overscheduled social agenda. I tried to comprehend how I could have no problems mingling in public in San Francisco, but struggled to get some type of acknowledgement on the college campus. Perhaps being gay and blind was too weird for many of the inexperienced young adults to handle.
But I felt that, the connections and the people I made when I was attending, getting my master's degree in writing were a lot more meaningful. And so while I couldn't make eye contact with everybody or smile or, connect how I did as an undergrad, I felt that I was connecting with people in a deeper way. Maybe I wasn't able to strike up a conversation as openly as I could with vision, but I learned that I could still connect in my own way.
There's really something that is interesting. You once were working for Google. Actually, I call it a headhunter, like looking for employees and stuff. And then all of a sudden you were on the other side of that. Could you go into that?
Of course. So just to kind of take a step back, before I became blind, I worked in Silicon Valley as a technical recruiter. And I found this job through chance. I initially started my career as a Unix systems administrator, and my first job was at Sun Microsystems, and I was placed at this staffing agency. The whole time I was on my project, I kept calling my recruiter and said, hey, by the way, I met this guy and he's really good at this, and he's really this. I met this other person who does a great job at this, and the entire time I was at Sun Microsystems working as a systems administrator, I had given my recruiter a total of 10 placements. And she said, "You're really good at matching people to jobs. I think that I'm going to train you and hire you and take you under my wing." And that's how I got into recruiting. And so that led into me obviously working my way through different companies and eventually getting contract recruiter positions at Apple and Google and eBay and Wells Fargo and so on. So when I lost my sight, I actually went back to recruiting, and it was really hard for me to see, first of all, how hard it is for people with disabilities in general to find work and to get hired, but specifically for the blind, how hard a lot of the job sites are to navigate. And so that's something that for me, being as someone who was a recruiter and thought I had a diverse approach and believed in equity, how far away I was from actually being true to my mission statement. It wasn't until I became blind that I realized that diversity also includes disability, and a lot of these companies who have amazing diversity statements don't have accessible websites. That's something that I think I touch on it in my book. It was definitely an awakening for me.
I really like that diversity includes disabilities. I like that phrase. I had someone tell me the other day that she never hired a person because they were sighted. Made me just pause for a second, like what a twist that was, She hires them for what they can do, what they can bring.
I have this phrase, something that I feel very strong about. I say, there's no greater disability than a cold heart. Anybody could have a cold heart. You could be blind, able-bodied, but if you have a cold heart, you're not letting anyone in or anything in. So there's no growth, there's nothing. They're stagnant. It's not even about disability or ability, it's about having a cold heart.
It's about who you are.
Mm-hmm.
Belo, we've talked about your first book, Blind, a Memoir. Is there one forthcoming that we can anticipate?
I have 2 book projects that I'm working on now. One is an anthology, and the second one is a sequel to Blind, which is also a collection of essays. And they're both, hopefully, if everything goes according to plan, they would be out maybe in a year or 2. But something that I'm really fascinated with is whenever I encounter anybody who's able-bodied, whether it's at work or, on the bus or something, they're just fascinated with how I do my day-to-day thing. People think it's amazing that I could throw out my own trash.
Hello, my name is Belo Cipriani, author of Blind, a Memoir. People who read my book often want to know more about a device I mentioned in a couple of my chapters called a color identifier. So what I thought would be a good idea was to put this clip together and just kind of show everyone how they work. The color identifier I use is called a Colorino, which I bought online. I bought it from a website called Maxi Aids. Pretty light. It has a camera on one end and a couple of buttons on the side.
I think that kind of inspired me to put together an anthology about people with disabilities, how they negotiate their rites of passage. So, first day on the job, first kiss, first dance. The project is called The Land of First. Essays on rites of passages by people with disabilities. It's been a wonderful experience. I'm, working with people who are autistic, editing their essays, people who have various disabilities. And it's really been, for me, again, my light bulb moment where I realized how much in common I have with other disabilities who I don't always socialize with. It was a great opportunity to really engage with other communities within the disability family.
I think it's very interesting how you do bring social life and your sexuality as well into your writings. Talk about how life as a blind homosexual might be different.
I think, great question, by the way. I think that I've always been part of the other. I grew up in San Jose, California, where majority of the community I grew up in were either Portuguese descent or Mexican. I didn't fit really any of those groups, and most of them were Catholics, and I was my family was Jewish. So at a very early age, I was so used to being part of the other. As a kid, I didn't celebrate the same holidays that my other kids in my classroom did, and often they would say, "Why aren't you normal?" And I just didn't have an answer at 7 or 8 years old. I would just shrug and go home and tell my mom about it. I'm not normal. As a teenager, the next phase was I came out as being gay. This was the 90s, early 90s, before Ellen and Elton John. So it was hard, and people would then ask me, "Why can't you be normal? Or why can't you try to be normal?" And I couldn't. When I became blind, then people would just say, "Oh, life must be hard for you because you're not normal." I think that that has helped me a lot, growing up always as a minority, always as being part of the other, has helped me stay focused on who I am and just focus on what I need to do and not get caught up in
Put the binders on, so to speak. No
exactly,
pun intended.
right? And so now I'm, like the Swiss Army knife of minorities, right? I'm Jewish, I'm a person of color, I'm blind.
Yeah, you got it covered.
I think that I always have to be aware of my surroundings, and that's something that I learned as a kid. Always be aware of your surroundings. People who think differently than you are, have different backgrounds, may not embrace who you are. And so I think that as someone who's, blind and homosexual, for example, travel is a big thing for me. I love to travel. And, a country may be, blind friendly, but it may not be gay friendly. So I probably would not go there.
Wow, there's so many things we could pursue with all of this. You got all afternoon? I was going to pursue your association with Guide Dogs for the Blind. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Absolutely. I am on my second guide dog. His name is Oslo, and I'm one of the spokesmen for Guide Dogs. I did a documentary for them. It's called Harnessing the Power of Partnership, which people could listen to it on YouTube.
The instructor handed me the leash, and it was love at first touch, because as soon as I reached for the leash and grabbed his head, I fell in love. Oslo, this 70-pound of lab energy, was just ready to take me in and love me to pieces. It was very magical. My name is Belo Cipriani, and I lost my vision back in 2007. I was 26. It was 2 months shy of my 27th birthday. My cause of blindness is retinal detachment. It took me a couple years to get over the grief of losing my sight.
There is a descriptive audio version. I've just been so grateful. Guide Dogs has done so much for me. They do so much for so many people. Guide Dogs is the largest guide dog school in the United States, but they don't receive any government funding. They rely strictly on donors. And so early on, I've been trying to give back. I've been helping them in various projects and try to promote their good work as often as I can.
That's probably where I first met you, is watching that Guide Dogs documentary that you did. That was well done, I have to say. My wife went out to Portland, part of the Guide Dogs for the Blind, and got a dog, Logan, now. So I like to think that I led her to think that that was a good place because, hey, check this video out.
Well, I think, was it when you were writing Blind that one of the scenes you described was while you were typing something very poignant and you were crying, and I think you were revisiting perhaps the assault, and your dog at the time actually put her paws up on you and licked your tears off your face. It was so moving.
For 2 years, I struggled with the idea of putting my story on paper. Although I received plenty of encouragement, I had a pain in my stomach when I tried to write it down that told me it was not time yet. I now know there were 2 powerful forces keeping me from doing what I understood would be beneficial for both my mind and my soul. The first notion holding me back was the hope that I could possibly get my sight back. It was obvious to me later that denial was the toughest phase to surpass in my mourning period. Second, I was afraid that putting myself back in all of those moments of pain, sorrow, and anxiety would spiral me into depression. I locked away any thoughts of telling my story. I heard Madge grunt during my moment of despair and confusion. I felt her front paws on my leg and kept my hands on the keyboard. She began to lick my tears and got me to smile. I decided to put the siren song on ice and dedicated my first piece, Hi, Dad, to my new partner, who gave me the best pep talk ever.
Yes, it was. It's actually the introduction to Blind. That was my first guide dog, Madge. And, these dogs do so much more than just guide work. They are your emotional support. And, a cool fact is I learned that they could read up to 70 different facial expressions, which is amazing. I didn't think we had that many. I was kind of stuck on the 7 dwarfs, right? Sleepy, happy, and so on. But they do so much more than just guide work, and they're true companions.
There was a point where I was reading, actually, I was watching something. I think a classroom teacher was reading, or someone was reading your book. It's when you first put the cane in your hand for the first time. And instead of describing the cane, you said that this had become your fate. That was good.
Thank you. As a blind person, as someone who was sighted and then became blind, I was very folk-centric. I was very focused on visual things in life. colors and shapes. When I became blind, I became very tactile, obviously. But I felt as though when I got my first cane and I grabbed it, it made it tangible. It made it real. I think for me, that's how I function now. I touch things and they become real, not just physically, but in my mind.
So, Billo, what suggestions would you have for someone who is facing vision loss or transitioning like from high school to college to the workplace, the challenges that they'll have? What kind of advice would you have for them?
I think that, and I get this a lot from the sighted community. A lot of sighted people have said to me that, oh, I could never do what you do if I were blind. And there is this notion that blindness is just the end of the world. And I think that for a lot of people who lose their vision, that's all they know, that they think blindness is the end of the world. And it's not. I'll tell you first thing that blindness does introduce some inconveniences, some nuisance, but that's all there is. You find your workarounds, and there isn't just one way of being blind. What I've discovered just in my last 10 years of blindness is that there's always something. I'm very short, so I've always wanted to be a little taller. People always want to be thinner or whatever. And for me, blindness, having vision would have made things more convenient, but it wouldn't make things better. I'm actually do a lot of lectures at colleges, and I always point this out to students that say that you become able-bodied. Being able-bodied is not a recipe for happiness.
Just like money.
Mm-hmm. That's what I would tell someone who lost their sight. Just remind them that, it's not the end of the world. Blindness is nothing but an inconvenience. But most of the time, it's a lot of fun. And once you've figured out how it worked for you, then things happen. I often come across a lot of blind youth who feel that they're not part of the popular culture or that they don't see themselves anything mainstream. And for them, all I say is, isn't it great that you could be the first? I mean, there's so much opportunity out there. And I see that as a plus. You don't see yourself out there. That means that the odds of you reaching out and becoming that, it's good. You have good odds.
Belo, as you know, this podcast is being sponsored by AT&T and Aira. The focus is on the AT&T hashtag Experience More campaign. How would you define that concept for blind individuals?
I think that as a blind person, we're able to experience through our other senses in more detail. We could smell things probably a little more intensely than people who are sighted. We have our own, language with Braille. I think that we have all this cool technology too now that we could use. I think that we're able to experience so much more. And I think that blindness opens up so many opportunities, especially for connecting with people. I think that you don't need sight to have vision. What I've been playing with lately has been the Braille smartwatch.
Oh, yeah, the one with the cells on it.
Exactly. They mailed me a version to play with, and it's amazing.
I think it came out beginning of this year, right?
It came out in April.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just pleasantly surprised with how much it does.
So at like 9:30, it would be 0930.
Correct.
Obviously.
Mm-hmm.
So can you describe it? Is that all that's on there, are the Braille cells?
It's just the Braille cells, but, the dots move, and it actually also spells out words.
Mm-hmm.
And so you can get through the different menus and read messages. Because it's only 4 cells, there's a button on the side of the watch that you use to scroll up and down.
That's interesting. That's really neat. I love innovative things like having that people try them and share that. I heard about it, but I haven't heard much about it again, so it's nice to hear about it. And that's made by who?
Dot Corporation.
That's right, Dot Corporation.
Let's talk a little bit more about technology. Are you a Mac or PC user?
I use both for very different things. I find that for anything related to writing, the Windows environment's a little easier for me. However, for anything web-related, I prefer the Mac. I'm an iPhone user, and I use every piece of tech I can for just about anything. So I'm using apps, everything in my house talks.
I thought it was interesting that you used it for the writing, but that's probably because of the word processing.
Yes, exactly. So, I'm working with editors, so, track changes, they're just more accessible for me on the Windows platform.
Yeah, exactly. I use Pages for some stuff, but I have Microsoft Office in my computer too. It's nice that they're starting to bridge across and having their software available and accessible on the Mac. So I'm liking this competitive world out there between Microsoft and Apple.
Yes, I am happy with those changes to the iPhone. It's just my best friend. And now I'm using the Alexa, the Echo by Amazon, and that's just wonderful. I was able to connect it to some of my appliances and get them to work using Alexa.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, it's all becoming hybrid now. You're starting to get like Walmart mixing it up with Google and Microsoft. Yeah, they're all like joining forces, cats and dogs together.
Yeah, definitely. And I grew up watching the Jetsons, right? And some of the technology that we're using now to me resembles some of the things they have, right? Especially artificial intelligence. But no, I've been happy with the improvements a lot of these companies have made, and I'm very happy to be blind in 2017.
That's a great statement. It's
Yes,
a good
it
time
is.
to be
A
blind
great
with all this
attitude.
technology.
We're speaking with Belo Cipriani. Talk about how people can find you. I know you have your own website, which would be bellocipriani.com. Where else can we look for you?
I am on Facebook, and that URL is facebook.com/Belo Cipriani. I'm on Twitter. My handle is @Beloism, and that's spelled BELOISM. And I just started an Instagram account a couple of weeks ago, so now I'm on Instagram. And my handle for Instagram is also Beloism, BELOISM.
And what about your blog? Don't you have an active blog at this point?
What I'm doing now is I have a nationally syndicated column called Seen in the Dark, and it's published by several news websites and papers across the country. It's also published in the UK and in Australia. And I started this blog on my website, and the blog just kind of took off, and I had a couple editors wanted to run the blog, so then I turned it into a column. All that means is now that it's a column, I have to pitch ideas to someone else, to an editor, and get them approved.
Meet deadlines.
Meet deadlines, make sure that I'm following style guides
Right.
and so on. It's been very effective. So Seeing in the Dark appears in the Bay Area Reporter, Diversity Rules magazine, South Florida, Gay News, Huffington Post runs it, The Spout in the UK. There's a couple different ones that are running it. And so, I talk about disability. I tend to focus on information that is useful to people with disabilities. So new tech, new policies, resources. It's interesting that I started off as a writer who wrote about my stories, and now I'm mostly writing about other people's stories. I just really became inspired with talking about people with disabilities who have passed on, who are part of history, but not always well remembered. And that's really where my interest is right now. I'm hoping to hopefully start a book project about that. But so many people with disabilities who have lived before me who have just paved the way and made it easier for me today.
Capoeira is an Afro-Brazilian martial art that's from Brazil. It's the national sport there, and I've been training for a little over 10 years. And I've been training with Mesa Accordion here for about a year. My favorite thing about Capoeira is the community. You get to play music, you get to work out, you get to talk to people. Not just the workout, the community.
You're into a martial art, Brazilian martial arts. Are you still into that?
Yeah, it's called Capoeira, and it's actually the national sport of Brazil. I'm still training, not as much as I like, but I'm still doing it, on a very part-time basis. I started training Capoeira when I was a kid. My dad's family is from Brazil, and so it was introduced through family members, and I did it on and off as a kid. And I didn't think I would be able to go back to Capoeira after losing my sight because it's done to live drumming. And so the music is very, very loud. But I found an instructor, Mestre Accordion, who's in Berkeley, who, developed this technique to work with me and help me get back into my training.
Yeah, I remember a scene in your book about how you were, I believe, competing for your yellow blue belt. You were kicked by your competitor, who happened to be a girl. You didn't expect it, and your comment at the end of it was you realized that you were not focusing 100% on the sport at that point because you'd been kind of distracted with other things going on in your life.
The drumming, clapping, and singing began to speed up, and I yawned twice before shaking Claribel's hand. I was too tired to attempt any acrobatics and limited my movements to basic kicks. Unfortunately, Claribel was full of energy, and after a few sequences of kicks and flips, I started to cough as I struggled to keep up with her. I saw the petite Filipina girl jump in the air, and too tired to register the kick, I was startled by her foot slapping my chin. The crowd of men and women who circled us gasped, and I began to feel my skin burn. Mestre Virginia had the same shocked look I must have had, and by the curl in his lower lip, I could tell we were both thinking the same thing. How could someone training for as many years as I, and holding a yellow belt, not duck or flee from such a commonly used kick? Out of the corner of my eye, I could see Mestre Virginia coming toward me, and in a few seconds he placed his arm around me. You are a good capoeirista, but the last year you've become distant. It's almost as if you're checked out, he said in his heavily accented English. I remained quiet, knowing perfectly well he was right. The last year of clubbing and drinking had displaced my goal of getting my blue belt.
Yeah, hanging out with that group of friends.
Right, clubbing
And doing all these things that kept me away from my training.
Speaking of clubbing, you mentioned Minneapolis earlier. We have a lot of listeners in Minneapolis. I'm from Minneapolis. What restaurant would you suggest for people in this area? What's one of your favorites? Restaurants, nightclubs?
Oh, it depends on people's mood, So if you want something a little low key, there's this really great Irish pub in St. Louis Park called McCoy's. They serve food. They have a full bar. Very nice. I really like that place. If you like a busy crowd and you don't mind the noise, there's always Chino Latino in Uptown, which I like a lot. As far as bars go, I've been to a couple of different ones. Of course, the K90s is really popular, but I tend to, if I'm going to go out, just, hang out with friends for a happy hour session, we tend to head out to the 19 Bar, which is on 15th Street, and the Eagle's nice. But yeah, no, Minneapolis is a very foodie city, so I almost feel guilty just naming these places because there's so much to do.
And with the Super Bowl coming here, you probably have enjoyed all the construction going on downtown.
Oh my gosh, yes. Well, it's also at the airport. I fly out a lot, so, there too. But no, I love Minneapolis, and this is where half of my family is. I have family all throughout all throughout the western suburbs and across the city, so it feels like home for sure.
Well, great.
Yeah, really good.
I am working with a winery called 100% Wine. They're called 100% Wine because they donate 100% of their profits to agencies that help people with disabilities find jobs. It's a nonprofit, and what they're doing is, employment is a big issue for people with disabilities. Whether you're deaf or blind, it's a big problem. And this winery is hoping to solve that problem by helping the agencies fund better program and better equipment and better training. The winery, again, is called 100% Wine. They have 3 varietals. They're based out of St. Louis, Missouri. Their website is drinkwinehelppeople.org, and people could check them out online and see if the wine's available in their area.
Well, we'll make sure we get all these links into the show notes.
We've been speaking with Belo Cipriani. Belo, it's been an absolute pleasure. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your day for us.
Thank you. This was great.
Thank you, Belo.
This concludes our presentation of a conversation with Belo Cipriani, brought to you by AT&T and Aira, and produced by Blind Abilities. Stay tuned for more similar interviews with individuals who have influenced the blindness community through their passions and their actions. And check out the hashtag #ExperienceMore campaign at experienceMore.att.com. You can also check out Aira at aira.io. That's AIRA.io. We'd like to thank Chi Chow for this amazing music. You can find Chi Chow on Twitter. Thanks for listening and have a great day.
When we share
what we see through each other's eyes, we can then begin to bridge the gap between
the limited expectations and the reality of blind abilities.
The realities of blind abilities.
For more podcasts with a blindness perspective, check us out on the web at www.blindabilities.com, on Twitter at blindabilities. Download our app from the App Store, blindabilities, that's 2 words, or send us an email at info@blindabilities.com. Thanks for listening.